And then, was it through him then that you heard about Waterford Crystal? How did you?
No, it was when I was about 9 or 10. We used to go to the pictures, as we called it, 2 nights a week, myself and my father. And passing up Johnstown, you could hear the sound from the factory. But we lived in Lower Newtown, and I'd never want to walk up John's Hill when I could walk down South Parade as a child. There was two blocks of houses. There were terraced houses, and there was a lane. And I used to stand on the high steps in South Parade and look at the blowers making the glass. They were the soda pot furnaces, and they were on shift work, and they finished at 12 at night. And around Christmas time, you could hear them singing. There was a song they used to sing, "The Bog Down in the Valley," and one man would sing the verses of it, and the lads would join in the chorus, and you could hear it going all the way up Water Street on the way home. But it was fascinating to see the molten glass coming out of the pots, and the lads blowing it, and they singing at the same time from that area.
That's gas. So you have that memory from your childhood?
I have that memory, yeah, I have that memory.
Okay. Where did you go to school?
I went to school in St. Eckland's. Great school, great place to live.
And did you go to secondary school?
No, I decided at the age of 14 I was going to work. And I was going to work in the glass factory. And I remember going down for the interview. And I was interviewed by Tom Healy. And he looked at my birth cert and he said, "You're only 14 years old," he said. "I couldn't take you on." I said, "I heard you take on people at the age of 14. "No," he said, "we don't. Come back," he said, when you're a little older." So that was June, around June. I went back in August and I sat an interview again with him. And he said to me, "You're in luck. There's a position after becoming available in the pottery area and pottering." And he said, "Would you be interested?" Yes, I said I would. Very interested in that because I knew about it. I sat with him. He explained everything to me and the rules, etc. And he said, "I'll take you down there." We walked down and I met a man that I was going to work with for the next 15, 20 years, a man called Paddy Jacob. They used to call him Paddy Potts. He was a very interesting man to work with and very good with his hands in pottery. He was the first pot maker, Waterford pot maker, to make pots. He was a pot maker and he made all the parts for the furnaces. He made all the disposable parts, expendable parts for the furnaces. And he worked under a man called McCarthy, who was brought over here to make pots. And eventually, McCarthy went back to England. He was a freelance pot maker, and Paddy took over the making of the pots.
And Paddy wouldn't have any tradition in that, would he?
No. He worked in Strangman's before he worked in Waterford Crystal. But
Strangman's is the brewery.
Yes. He would make rings without palette knives. He could smoothen them off with his hands. He was very careful, making sure that anything that he made had no air holes in it, because if there was air holes in a gathering ring, which was the ring that floated on the top of the molten glass, and the blowers gathered from that, that pieces wouldn't fall off of it, or the air hole wouldn't break a hole in the ring, because it would cause rejects. We got on great through the years.
And sorry, Sean, people wouldn't understand that, like, the whole glass factory wouldn't work without the pottery side, without the woodworking side, making the molds. So it's really interesting that these little things, really important parts of the whole operation, were not really in the public eye, really, were.
No, it was the mechanics of the glass production, the furnace, the pots, how they were worked, how they were treated, how they were serviced, the chemicals, the batch plant making the chemicals. There was 6 different types of chemicals in a batch. There was also the secret ingredient that gave it its sparkle. It was a whole. There was an army behind the blowing room and the cutting room, getting that glass to the production and to the levels and the requirements that the factory needed.
It's class. I mean, it's a whole world.
Yeah.
That people
Yeah.
do there. And like pottery, it's a very tactile thing. Did you like working with the pot?
Yes. In school, if there was anything to do with pottery or anything like brickwork or anything like that, I would light up, and it would be something that I would like. Something that I would like to try at the time. But this was like pennies from heaven. It suited me. The job suited me because we had a lot of freedom to do whatever we wanted in the factory. And during those years, Paddy and myself made a lot of good suggestions in the factory regarding glass production and helping production and trying to do better all the time.
And during the whole thing of changing the pot or putting in and out the molten glass in the pot, I mean, that was a very dangerous occupation.
Yes, it was. It was called pot setting, and it would be planned the week before that. There was a kiln in the factory. We called it the pot arch, and we would pick 3 pots from the pot room. Always the 3 best pots that were there. We'd examine them. We would customise them for the actual blower in case he wanted a bigger opening in the pot, or he wanted a piece out of the pot, or a groove in the lip of it, or something like that. And we would take the pots to the blowing room, put them into the pot arch on Monday, and have them ready and up to temperature for Saturday. It was a slow process. Then when Saturday came, we'd arrive in the factory at 4 o'clock. We'd get all the equipment out, and we would get the carriages ready, as we'd call the chariot and the carriage ready, because there was no forklift in Johnstown at the time. So we had to use a carriage. We used the carriage to get the pot from the furnace, from the pot arch, and we put it on a chariot to roll it to the actual furnace itself, roll it off of the carriage onto the platform, and then put the pot in the furnace. But there was a lot of work happened before that. Number one, you'd have to take the old pot out of the furnace. You'd have to break down the wall, the front wall, we called it the loose wall, break down the wall with bars and hooks, clear the area. The furnace actually went up in temperature. They put the temperature up on the furnace before we did this, so that we wouldn't lose any of the pots in case it cooled down too fast. Once the front of the furnace was clear and all the blocks were taken away, we'd put 2 bars underneath the pots, or the pot that we were working on. And some of the guys would stand up on the bars to create leverage underneath the pot to lift it off of the floor of the furnace. Once that happened, you'd shove a brick under the pot and then put bars under the pot, shove in the carriage and pull the pot out of the furnace. In Johnstown, there was 18 people on pot setting because there was an awful lot of, you need a lot of strength at the time because the furnace was old and the pot had a tendency to stick to the floor of the furnace. Once the pot was out, we took a breather, we walked away from it and gave it a chance to cool down. And we'd pull it across the platform and pull it down a wooden ramp. As it was going down the wooden ramp, you run away from it because you had no control over where the pot and the carriage went. But once it landed on the floor, it stopped, and you rolled it down to the area where we disposed of our rubbish and waste glass or waste from the blowing room. You left it there. And then you went to the pot arch and took the new pot out and put it back in the furnace, built the wall around it, and the pot was set in the furnace. We would do 3 of them on a Saturday, sometimes 2. And it was a hot job, very hot job.
The fellas that worked on the Saturday to do that, they got paid overtime.
Yes, they got paid overtime. In 1964, they were getting 10 shillings per pot. And later on, they got more, and as time went by, it went up with inflation. So, also there was a bit of camaraderie there, and there was never a bad word spoken between anybody. We were laughing and joking, taking a rest and continuing with the job. The pot setting itself would start at 4 o'clock. It would finish around, say, 5:30, 7 o'clock for 3 pots. But sometimes if you couldn't get the pot from the floor of the furnace, it could go on up to 9, 10, 11, 12 at night.
And would people go for a few drinks afterwards? I mean, you must have...
Of course. And in the event of a pot getting stuck and we couldn't get it off the floor of the furnace, we'd build the wall back up again to give the furnace more temperature, especially on the twin pot furnaces that were there. And we'd give it about 2 or 3 hours to heat up. And we might go to Canty's bar in Johnstown or Keneally's for a drink or 2 and come back and continue on the job. It was okay because it was a very hot job and you get dehydrated very fast. But we never had a problem. The job was done.
I mean, it sounds mad. That kind of work sounds a bit kind of crazy in the sense of, like, people can easily get hurt.
I don't ever remember anybody being hurt on it.
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah, and not burn here and there, but you just continue with it. Yeah. These days, it doesn't happen like that. It's all done with forklifts and hydraulics. We couldn't get a forklift into the blowing room in Johnstown for 2 reasons. Number one, we didn't have the facilities outside to drive one in, and on top of that, the floor in Johnstown couldn't take a forklift. It was too light, so you couldn't have a forklift up there.
So yourself and Paddy then, did you work every Saturday?
We worked every Saturday. We worked our 5 days a week, and if we were very busy, we'd work Saturday morning. If we weren't busy, we wouldn't work. But when I was 16, I started my first pot setting, but Paddy was doing it for years before that.
And when you started off first, would you have much interaction with the rest of the lads, apart from the lads who did the pot setting? Would you have any interaction with the blowers or the coders?
Yes. The blowers, yes. Over a period of time, I'd work with the blowers, and if they wanted something done with the furnace, or with the brickwork or the expendable items themselves, they might request something to cool down the pot, to cut down on the size of the opening in the pot and put some kind of a shaped brick in there, if they were getting sting on their hands. They used gathering stones where they'd put it in the front of the pot. It would give them lift on the pot. It would be covered with glass. The glass would go hard, and they would put their irons on that to give them lift to get the glass out of a certain area in the pot where they could see where the good glass is coming from in the pot. They were great at that. They were great guys, especially the heavy blowers. They might want to take a big gather out of the pot for the next, say, 12 weeks, and you'd have to open the pot for them a little bit more, and you'd have to make a bigger stopper to put in front of that during the melting period.
Would you remember any of the old blowers that were there at that time?
Pardon?
Could you remember some of the old blowers that were there at that time?
Oh, I remember some of the famous blowers that were there, like Joe Cretson, Donald Cadd. I think Donald was the first Irishman to put a stem on a glass. Paddy Hannigan. He was a heavy blower. He used to blow the very, very heavy stuff. There was an Italian man, Egidio Gianni. He was a Gentili blower where he used to blow the bowl and the stem at the same time. And the foot would be put on by somebody else. They were great craftsmen. They were absolute great craftsmen, and nothing was a problem to them. They could make anything, in glass.
And what was the communication like between the German or the Czech or Italian trade craftsmen with the local guys? What was the relationship like?
It was very good. Like, they were friendly guys and they were easy to work with. And people like Joe Cretson, you learn a lot from them. They joined in the social scene in the factory. They got on well with everybody. Joseph Cretson gave me a lot of advice. Joseph used to use a tool called a glory hole, and it was a heat box. And where Joe would be working on a glass, he might want to heat it up. But instead of going up to the pot where the production was, we'd build a box, a circular box, insulated with MPK insulating bricks. And inside it was Stein aluminum bricks that would hold the heat. And that would be running at around maybe 1400 degrees. And he could put his glass in there and melt it by only moving 2 steps from his bench, and then work on it from there. And Joe worked with these before, and he used to tell me about certain rings that could be inside and how to get the flame to stay in the middle of the heat box, and also the double ring that might hold back some of the heat. They came here, they gave their knowledge. They helped people. They helped the apprentices blow. They gave people a chance to do what they did. They were great guys. I got on well with all of them.
Did you ever walk into Europe to have a look at what they were doing?
Yes. I spent a bit of time in Europe looking at what they were doing in a factory in Forget that were using new types of pots. And we went in and we had a look at the pots, and then we looked at the way they were doing production, which it was no different to what we were doing, no different whatsoever. I also went to Seattle to see the artisans working and look at their tools. Myself, Tony Kiley, and Mark Keating went there to see the artisans and their tools and how they used their heat boxes, and how they had multiple doors on these boxes to keep the heat in, to get the heat out if they were working close to it, keep the heat in if they had to melt the glass faster. Tony was looking at the mechanics of how these things work, and Mark was taking the notes. When they came here later to Kilbarry, and we set up the workshop there, and they came in the morning, and they were working, say, within 2 or 3 hours. They started at 8 o'clock, and say at 11 o'clock they were making glass. They had no problems with any of the equipment. We knew the equipment, and listening to the older guys, the Joe Cretsons and those guys, listening to those and looking at what they wanted, we were able to marry both, and these guys had a fantastic workshop to work in here in Waterford.
Were you there then when all the artists came?
Yes, I was there for them. I met a lot of them in Seattle, and when they were here, worked with them. Any help they wanted, they got. They also got help from the various maintenance departments and the blowers, and we cooperated, and they were very happy going away. Like they did a project here. I don't know enough about the project to talk about it, but as long as their workshop was right, that's all that counted with me.
And like the Johnstown was very basic, wasn't it?
It was a very basic factory, and a very basic factory, but there was plans for the factory in Kilbarry, so there wasn't a lot of money spent on it in its later years, and it became a store. When the furnaces were turned off, it became a store. What we had there was, we had a 10-pot furnace, which was the old 10-pot, where the burner went down The burner was on the top of the furnace, and it pushed the heat down into the furnace. The 12-pot furnace, which was on the other side, that was the newer furnace that was there. That flame came from the basement, and it came up into the furnace and up into the crown. There was 12 pots in that furnace. And then there was twin-pot furnaces. And at the same time, there was also a 6-pot furnace on soda, and there was a 4-pot furnace on the soda end. There were live animals to look after. They could backfire, they could go wrong. When they went wrong, there was a great team of furnace men there to put them right.
And what was the atmosphere there when you went in as a young lad? And I know you worked very close with Paddy.
Yeah.
What was the atmosphere like there? Was it very kind of like, I mean, was it a very macho kind of place? Was it a very kind of
It was.
hard man kind of atmosphere?
There was a little bit of that, but not a lot. Once you got on with people and you were seen to help people, you were respected. I don't think there was funny things that happened, like a new apprentice coming into the blowing room and he might be sent for a glass hammer or a bucket of blue steam, that kind of thing, but that never happened to me. I've never seen it happen. I think people copped on that it wasn't working. But it was an amazing place to work.
And I know you mentioned, earlier on that in Johnstown people could go over for a pint, but there was also a bar in the factory, wasn't there, at one stage?
Well, you couldn't go for a pint during the normal working hours, unless you were thirsty from the heat and you wanted to have something during the break time. But I never seen much of that. I never seen that. An odd time you would see it, or a guy might have a few the night before that, maybe Monday morning. He might call to the Keneally's pub for maybe a half pint or something, just kill the thirst. But on pot setting, if there was a break and there was something wrong, you could go and have a drink, because the water there, the water in the factory, you could only drink a certain amount of it when you were sweating and when you were dehydrated.
And then when you went to Kilbarry, then was that a whole new ball game?
It was a whole new ball. It was a whole new ball game for several reasons. It was a bigger factory. There was more space, higher ceilings. Working on the floor on a winter's day, you would actually be cold. Working on the platform, the temperature was just right, where the furnace and where the openings were. But still, it was a good place to work. As the factory got older, the furnace got older and it had its problems. And this is when we had to step up to the mark and keep them going, because we had the same furnaces in Dungarvan and we had the same in Butlerstown. The factory decided that I should take over more departments, and we brought in other people to work in the pot room. And then I took on I took charge of the chemical plant, which was the batch plant, where we mixed all our chemicals for glass production, all the recycling of the glass. And the factory adopted a zero waste policy on glass, where we had to keep all the glass and remelt it, because it was a waste, thrown it into the dumping area. I also took on other departments as well, and like the trays department, which was bringing glass around the factory. You had to put it in these trays, and the trays had to be clean and spotless. Looking after that department and making sure there was enough trays. And then when the tank furnace started, making sure there was enough cardboard boxes to take the glass from the furnace and put it into storage.
So you had the secret formula there?
I had the secret formula. And to this day, I never told anybody. But the secret formula, the formula was similar to what was in other factories. But we had a little tablet for the glass production, for the batches. And eventually we did it in liquid form to give it a total mix. in the mixer to make sure it was mixed evenly through the actual batch, and that was it.
And like, what years were you there from, Sean?
Pardon?
What years were you in the class?
I was in the class from 1962 up to 2003.
Wow.
Yeah, 41 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long
41.
And you left in 2003, and at that stage, could you see the end coming? I guess?
No. No. I left for several reasons. Number one, I had my 40 years completed. The other reason was my health was starting to take a little downturn, so I had to think things out. So there was a few people taking redundancy, and I inquired about it, and I was accepted. But first of all, for that 2 years, I had to make sure everybody knew where everything was. I had to work with people to make sure that they knew what I was doing, knew what I was at. And my colleague and friend Henry Russell, he took over from me there and then when I left. He was a great guy and good man with people and very precise on everything.
So you got an awful shock then?
Pardon? Did
you get a big shock when it closed?
Yes, there was a big void in my life. I often thought about going back in around again for a walk and meet the lads. But I didn't. I used to go down to the sales when they happened after that, but I just left it at that. I had other things going on in my life.
But I mean, when the actual glass factory closed down, did you get a big shock?
I did. Well, I did at that time. I never thought it would close down. I thought that, I never thought it would close down. And the way it closed down, and the press that it got, a factory that did so much for charity in this town, and the workers that did so much for charity in this town, but it was tough. It was terrible to see it. And now when you pass there, and you see the office block being derelict and the place flattened, it's very sad, very, very sad for such a fantastic factory that did so much for the town. And the people in the town, even the people that didn't work there. The people that worked there, they were great people.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose people wouldn't realise, there was a sense of pride about your work, wasn't there?
Yes, people were very proud. And that came from the old school. The workers were very proud of what they did, no matter what they did. If it was cleaning the yard, doing some carpentry, the fitters, the electricians, they did fantastic work, and all their work was good. Your work had to be good, because there was a production manager down there at the time, and he knew, he could spot a mistake a mile away, Dr. Hans Winkelmann. He was a great guy, and I had a lot of dealings with him in the few years that I worked with him. And he was hard to work with, but he was very precise, and you learn a lot from him.
So, I mean, he was a tough cookie then?
He was a tough cookie, but on the surface he was a tough cookie. But if you work with him, his theory was that if the furnaces were right, if the pots in the furnace were right, the batch formula was right, the melt was right, you had no problem with glass. But there was always little problems with stone. If people may not understand that, stone, seed and cord is what caused the rejects out in the factory. Bad work, there was very little of it. People took pride in their work, and they were also on piece rate, so bad work wouldn't come into it. But sometimes there'd be a lot of stone in the glass, so he would home in on that and try and find out where it came from. Mostly where it came from was the walls of the pot. If it was a thing that the pot was getting old and the walls were becoming porous, the lead in the glass would bore into the wall and knock out little bits of stone. And say over the weekend when the pot wasn't being worked, a lot of that stone would fall out on the surface and would stay on the surface of the glass as it was melting. That Winkleman would follow up on that and make a decision to have the pot ladled, all the glass taken out, the rings taken out, new rings put in, the pot scraped, and the pot filled again with good glass. And once that happened, and if the same thing happened, that pot would have to be changed. That's the kind of a man he was. Then he gave those skills to the other foremen that were there, like great man Andy Paul. He was the furnace supervisor in Johnstown, and he was equally as knowledgeable as Dr. Winkleman in that matter. He would be watching all that.
It's gas. There's great skills involved. I mean, they can make those decisions and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's all about money, right?
Yeah, it's all about money.
And sorry, just about money too. I mean, I know the glass workers were very generous to a lot of causes and whatever, but there was a sense of resentment in the town, wasn't there, about how well paid workers were and all this kind of crap.
Well, a lot of some workers were well paid because they worked hard. If you were on piece rate and you're not going to give yourself enough time to have a minute to wash up to go on a tea break, you wash up during your break, and you're making those extra glasses. You're cutting those extra glasses. It was hard work to earn that money. There was the general section, which I was in. The money wasn't great there. It was mostly a little above basic wage, but there was opportunities. There was overtime. There was extra departments wanted help. You could do extra work there. You could do some overtime. There was that. Not all the wages there was big wages, especially in the general section. And the apprentices and the lads knocking off the glass, cleaning the blowing irons for the blowers, their wages was also, it wasn't great.
And like looking back now, I mean, do you feel sad about looking?
I feel happy that I worked there, and I worked there for so long, and I worked there during its best years. I enjoyed it. I had a great social life. Tops of the town. I took part in Tops of the Town for many years.
Tell us a little bit about Tops of the Town, because we haven't heard much about that at all.
I'll tell you a story about Tops of the Town. The producer in Water Crystal was Dermot Graham. A lot of people know him. He was a great producer, and he was a perfectionist. And it was my first time going to rehearsals. Myself and Eddie Doyle, my friend in the factory, and Eddie wasn't too interested, but he came with me to see what it was all about. And we went to Stephen Street School. And we had a room there, and all the glass factory people was in the room, and we were all talking away. And Dermot came in and he said, "Right, lads, this is the first rehearsal. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to learn some songs." So that year he was doing Oklahoma, and he sang the song, and he gave us the words. He sang it, and he asked us to sing it, and then he sang it again, and he asked us to sing it. And he started with, "There's a bright golden haze on the meadow." So we sang it. "There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. The corn is as high as an elephant's eye, and it looks like it's climbing clear up to the sky." And he said, "Stop. Number one," he said, "what's the first word?" We said, "There's." "I didn't hear it," he said. "It's there's a bright golden haze, and it's not the meadow, it's the meadow. There's no such thing," he said, "as an elephant. It's an elephant. It doesn't start with the letter N. It starts with the letter E." Now, pronunciation, he said, is so important. The sky is as high as, and we all said, elephant's eye. And it looks like it's climbing clear up to the sky. It's not the sky. And we realized he meant business. He was a perfectionist. And he spotted those mistakes. And an adjudicator would spot him as well. And from that night on, our diction in Tops of the Town and our wording had to be perfect. We enjoyed it. It went on for many years. And we were lucky. Like before the first show, he would take us He would take all of us to the canteen, and the canteen ladies would cook up a beautiful meal for us before we went down there. The makeup would be on, the last tweaking of the songs, he would go over it with us, and we'd make our way in the vans, cars, and maybe a coach to the theatre aisle, and put on the show. It was very good. It was very worthwhile doing. And
Dermot didn't work in the factory.
He worked in the factory.
Did he? What did he do?
He worked in a place called the Stoppering. It's where they fitted stoppers into decanters. Because they were hand blown, you could put a stopper into a decanter and it would shake. You had to grind out the inside of the decanter and maybe shape the outside of the stopper itself to fit into the actual decanter. And he worked in that area. And also finishing glass and repairing glass in that area as well. He was a genius.
So then he came from within the company?
He came from within the company, yeah. Yeah, he came from within.
He was a professional producer, though.
He ended up being a professional producer, and he worked for WLR as well. And there was rumours that he was going to work on RTE, but his family was here, and I don't think it would have suited him. But he was good. He was very interesting to work with.
And he was a publican.
He was a publican, yes, and he had a garden centre as well at another stage.
Very enterprising man.
Very, 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 very nice man to be with. I spent a lot of time in his company after rehearsals. But the one rule he had with Tops of the Town, if you come into rehearsals thinking you're going to have the crack here and have fun here and come in under the influence of alcohol, you're gone straight away. He was strict. He put on good shows, like many others as well.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he would also know the lads, wouldn't he? He would know the people who were
He knew everybody well. He knew everybody well. And he spent time with people, even during working hours, talking to them, going over different little techniques with him, and even the dancing. He taught us how to dance on stage. You know, he was very light on his feet. And what a voice. He had a fabulous voice. He sang, if I was a song from, no, I can't think of it. Topol. If I Was a Rich Man.
Yeah, if I was a rich man.
If I Was a Rich Man.
It's from the Fiddler on the Roof.
Fiddler on the Roof. He sang a song from Fiddler on the Roof, If I Was a Rich Man. He sang every word. And he got a standing ovation in the theatre aisle.
Fantastic. And a great all-rounder, as you said.
He was a great all-rounder, yeah, all-rounder. He was a good man, businessman.
And then also, I mean, he was fairly outspoken on the radio when he was eventually on the radio.
I didn't hear a lot of him on the radio because it was morning time, and we were working in a noisy area.
So did he take early redundancy?
I don't know. I think he decided to leave the factory because he was wasted in what he was doing. He went on to other things like his garden centre, and then eventually he was doing something else like healing, something like that. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was. Honestly, what?
Very interesting man.
Interesting man.
And so he won the Tops of the Town.
We won the Tops of the Town, yeah, and we won the national Tops of the Town in the Gaiety. It was.
That must have been some buzz, wasn't it?
It was a great buzz. It was a great buzz. We had a great party after it on Tuesday night. We had work on Wednesday, and we had a great party, and it started something in the factory that everybody wanted to be part of it then. And at that stage, I was getting involved in the music business myself, and I left Tops of the Town to one side, and I took up music myself. I played the banjo and guitar. So I did in the theatre aisle as well. In one Tops of the Town show, I sang "Where Do You Go to My Lovely," a Peter Starstead tune, and I enjoyed it. But it was hard on your own, very hard.
Like, it's interesting, I mean, in the sense that, like, you're obviously a very creative person. You know what I mean? In the
Yeah.
sense of, like, you're involved with pottery, you're
Yeah.
involved in your work,
Yeah.
you're doing all these things.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, to get these opportunities is quite interesting, isn't
It
it?
was, and you know, if you get an opportunity in your lifetime, you take it. That was my motto. If you could learn something from somebody else, please, do. Now, like, I gave away what I knew, I gave back to other people. But people out there, some people kept themselves to themselves. That was their business. But there was great people out there that gave their opinions, their skills to other people. Around 1963-64, I was working in the pot room. And this man ran in the door and he said to me, "You have to leave, the factory is on fire." And I said, "Do I have to?" I said, "I'm in the middle of doing something." "You have to leave," he said. "The factory is on fire. Go out the back way, go up through by the back of the houses at South Parade. People are assembling up there." I went up by the batch plant, got to the top of the yard, and there was black smoke bellowing out of the entrance, the downstairs entrance into the blowing room. The compressors were still on. There was a lot of noise. Everybody from the cutting shop was walking from the cutting shop up to the top of the yard, opposite the office block. And a few people were standing down by the back of the office near the oil tanks. And I stood there. Dr. Winkelmann walked down the yard, walked to the crowd. The crowd scattered a bit because there was a fire brigade coming in the yard. And the lads from the fire station, fire brigade, started rolling out their hoses. And Dr. Winkelmann told him not to do anything until he says so. He went down to the door, looked in, took off his coat. As far as I can remember, one of the ladies from the canteen gave him a towel to put around his face, and he walked straight into the smoke. About 20 seconds into it, there was a huge plume of smoke came out the door. And about maybe 20 seconds later, Dr. Winkelmann walked out backwards, towing a big sack in front of him, and the smoke bellowing from the sack. He brought it up from the door, left it in the yard, went back in again through the smoke, which was worse at this stage. He was in for about 20 seconds, picked up another bag and pulled it out the door and left it in the yard. It wasn't actually a fire in any part of the structure of the factory. It was a small piece of molten glass fell down through the floor because there was a gap between the furnace and the actual blowing room floor, because the furnace started on ground level and the blowing room was upstairs. And it went into the charcoal, which we used. It was a powder charcoal that we used for putting on the moulds, and it smouldered and just took off. There was a terrible mess inside the area where it ignited. But I asked him later, why did you stop the fire brigade? Why did you stop them from putting in water to put it out? He said it was too near the furnace and it would destroy the furnace if the water went in there, because the flues of the furnace, which the chimney of the furnace went underground. It came from the furnace, the fumes and the heat that came from the furnace went underground through a flue and up the chimney stack. And if that filled with water, he said, the furnace would stop and it would take a long time to get it going again. That's why he said, I tried it myself to see what I could do first before the fire brigade put in the water. That's the kind of man he was. He was, it wouldn't happen now. No matter who he was, it wouldn't happen now, So I'll never forget that day. And I was standing by the oil tank while all that was going on.
A very safe place to hang.
A very safe place, yes.
Okay.
I'll have to tell you about that, because the bung. From time to time, the blowers would notice that there was a kind of a sting in the air, like maybe on the back of their neck or maybe on their hands. They might start doing that, tipping their hands or wiping the back of their neck. What was happening was a brick on the main furnace would fall in, or I would say maybe 8 of them would fall in. from the crown, from the very centre of the crown, and they'd fall down into the basement of the furnace, down into the glass pocket, down into the chamber that held the waste glass. Say over the next few hours, the bricks that were over that, the insulating bricks that were over that, and a layer of sand would start to trickle down there. And it would come out through the bricks. It would come out through the joinings in the bricks. Because the sand was trickling down and the flame was going up and there was pressure inside in the furnace, the red hot sand would filter out into the air and land around the blowing room. Wow. Once that happened, everybody left the blowing room. And I was called, the foreman was called, Andy Paul, and the furnace men and the pot fillers were called. And we'd have to make a decision on what we were to do with it. Because there was nothing holding up the bricks, they would start to fall. So in every blowing room in Waterford Crystal, at the back of the arches, there was always a big slab. It was there for emergencies if you had to cover something. The slab was about maybe 3.5 foot by 3.5 foot by 5 inches in thickness. That slab would be brought down to that furnace and placed up on the crown of the furnace. And then myself and the furnace men would start to move back the bricks slowly. As we were moving back the bricks, the sand would go down to the furnace and come back up again red hot while we were up on the furnace and start landing on the blowing platforms. Eventually, we'd get them all up. We'd get up all the bricks, and we'd have a look at the hole in the crown. And it was white hot, and it would be approximately maybe 3 foot wide. So we would have to cover that hole, and it's in the centre of the furnace, right in the centre. We would have to cover that hole with that slab until we make up our mind how we'd have to repair that. Because you couldn't leave the crown hanging like that, because over a period of time the next layer of bricks would go in. So you had to plug these bricks on the crown. Once we had the slab over it, it stopped the sand and the broken bricks flying up out of it. And we'd cover it up with clay, seal it down. We'd walk across the platform with planks, and seal it with fire clay. The following week then we'd put in what we called the bungs in the kilns to be heated. The bungs consisted of 3 foot wide circle of fire clay, seliminite fire clay, tapered slightly, hollow in the middle down to about 3 inches, and 3 lugs inside in it, where we'd put a key into it, turn it, and it would catch the lugs, and we'd have to lift it up on the crown. This would happen, say, on the Thursday of the following week, and we'd order a block and tackle to be put up on the girders in the blowing room to lift this bung up over the furnace to put it into the crown. When this happened, the furnace had to rise in temperature because it's going to lose an awful lot of heat, and the glass would be melting for the next day's production. We'd also have to use planks on the top of it, on the top of the furnace, so as we could walk close to the actual hole without getting burned, and clean around the hole to make sure that the bung itself was not sitting on anything unusual, like old clay or old sand that would give way, and that could give way as well. We always made what happened to somebody?
No, it's okay. Don't worry, it's just a door.
Yeah. We always made wedges, small brick wedges, in case the bung was too big and would slip down through the furnace. So when the day came, we got the pot carriage, the big metal pot carriage, and we brought it down to the furnace. We lifted the bung up onto the platform with the key and brought it over close to the furnace with an iron bar through the key, and we got it over very close to the furnace. And then we put a hook from the block and tackle into that, and we lifted it up over the side of the furnace and got it up on the platform. At that stage, this bung is nearly a ton weight. It's very heavy, heavy material. You can't leave it swing because it could swing to the other side and break the barriers on the other side of the top of the furnace. We'd have to hold it back. And when you hold it back, the minute it left the platform, maybe 2 people would have to hold it back and prise it gently over to the centre of the furnace. And then we'd pull back the slab for the bung to lock back into the centre of the furnace. Most times it worked. Most times the bung would go down too far and we'd have to wedge it. The problem was sealing it. So you're working on a platform of wood that's very hot and at times went on fire. And you're using your clays to seal it the whole way around. Any of the waste that was there, you put it down in the hole in the bung. You cover that with clay. And then you put the slab over it, which was now bent with the heat after being there for a week. And then you covered it with insulating bricks and you left it. And it stayed there forevermore. The reason why it couldn't be put in the first place when the furnace was cold is the furnace expands and contracts during the melting process and during the seasons. And you need something solid, not bricks, because you never get them to hold together. You need a solid lump of material to go into that. If it was a thing that it couldn't do that, it might break other bricks and they would be a lot harder to do and repair. So that was a job that very little people seen done in the factory.
I'd say no one.
Yeah.
And I presume it's never been filmed.
It was but yes, and I don't know who has the film. No, it wasn't filmed, it was photographed.
Oh, yeah. But it sounds like a mini Chernobyl.
It was like a volcano. For about half a minute, it was like a volcano with all the sand spewing up out of the furnace. And so,
okay, can we get those
yes.
shots now? You stay where you are.
Okay.
I'm over to you. And